So if you think you're standing firm, be careful that you don't fall. Today we're going to look at the life of Jacob. And just to work into this topic a bit, how many of you are twin? Do you have any twin? I know we have one. Okay. How many of you have children who are twins? I knew we had one up here too. So, you know, sometimes twins are so nearly identical in every way that we have great difficulty even seeing them as individuals. We had twin sisters at Crossroads College a few years back, and they really looked alike. They both had long blonde hair. They were usually together. They had similar interests. Now, I eventually learned to tell them apart, but I had to see both of them together in order to tell them apart. If I saw them separately, forget it. Even their names were similar, Jennifer and Jessica. So that wasn't any help either in trying to sort them out. However, sometimes we know twins are so different in every way that no one would even guess they are twins. We know from a biological standpoint that there are identical twins and there are fraternal twins. And many times fraternal twins are of different genders. They don't look alike any more than any brother or sister look like one another. They maybe have differing heights and weights and have different hair and eye colors and different personalities and interests. In fact, the only thing sometimes marking them as twins is that they happen to have the same birthday. Well, today's message is about a set of twins who are greatly different from one another. I'm speaking of Jacob and Esau, twin sons of Isaac and Rebekah. Of course, as we've already learned in previous messages, Isaac was Abraham and Sarah's miracle child, the child of promise, through whom the family line, his family line, the promises to Abraham would be fulfilled. When Rebekah finally became pregnant after years of childlessness, Scripture tells us that the extreme movement of the babies within her caused her great concern. Now, of course, they didn't have ultrasounds or anything like that. She could only guess at the fact that she was having twins. But she wondered what was happening to her, and so she went to the Lord and she asked him what was going on. And this is how he responded to her. 2 nations are in your womb. You thought you were just having twins. 2 peoples from within you will be separated. One people will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger. That's in Genesis 25:23. Well, the struggles between them within the womb only became more prevalent after birth. And the diversity between them only served to spotlight their differences. From birth, their appearance was not the same. Esau was ruddy in complexion and very hairy. In fact, his name Esau means hairy. And the other name by which he was sometimes known, Edom, means red. Jacob, we're told, on the other hand, was fair. Their interests were not similar at all. Esau was a skillful hunter, an outdoorsman, what we would probably call a man's man. In fact, he was the favorite of their father, Isaac. Jacob, on the other hand, was Rebekah's mama's boy, preferring to stay around the tents, more quiet and reflective, but just as likely to get his own way in his own way. Jacob was apparently intelligent and did not always, as we're going to see, use his intelligence in an ethical fashion. But as the story shows us, he used it to his own advantage in getting what he wanted, even if it meant taking it from his not-so-smart older brother. Yes, Esau was the elder, but remember the Lord's words to Rebekah before they were born. The older will serve the younger. From the time of their birth, actions of Jacob showed his strong ambition, because even as they were coming out of the womb, Jacob was holding on to Esau's heel. So when they named the babies, this second baby who was holding on was named Grasper, or Caesar, or Holder. It's not exactly a flattering name to give to your baby boy. Later, that term had the connotation of deceiver. One with the ambition of a grasper stops at nothing to wind up on top. And that's exactly what we see with Jacob. As the firstborn of the twins, Esau was the one with all the rights. According to their custom, the eldest son in the family had property rights to a double portion of inheritance. He was the primary heir and the favored child. In this case, because of the promises that had been made, one would also assume that the older would be the one to carry on the promises that had been made to Abraham and Isaac. But we've already seen an exception to that. If you remember, in the case of Abraham, Isaac was not his eldest son. Rather, Ishmael was. But God said, no, Isaac is the child of promise. And we see just the same in the case of Jacob and Esau, that sometimes the elder serves the younger. One day, as they had grown into men, each child did what he did best. Jacob cooked up a great batch of stew, something he knew would put him in good graces with his brother Esau, whose appetite could never be filled. Esau had been out hunting and could think only of his desire to refuel. When he smelled Jacob's stew, he demanded some. But Jacob, always conniving, was waiting for him. He saw him coming, you could say. In fact, he had been grasping at Esau's position as the firstborn since the time of their birth, as we've already seen. So he says, first, sell me your birthright. Esau could think only of the moment, not the long-term consequences of his actions. So with little hesitation, he agreed to exchange his rights and privileges as the firstborn for a single meal of lentil stew. Obviously, the most expensive meal he ever ate. And probably second only to the fruit of the tree of knowledge and good and evil, and its cost to the one who consumed it. The account in Genesis 25 ends by saying, so Esau despised his birthright. Jacob's tricks were not finished, however. His desire to supplant Esau was not yet complete, and the process wasn't finished. This mama's boy had the assistance of his mother to further trick both Isaac and Esau. Genesis 27 tells us that Isaac knew he was approaching death. He was also losing his eyesight. And as he knew death was coming, he called his favorite son Esau to him and asked him to prepare a special meal of wild game for him. In exchange, in Jacob's mind, or in Isaac's mind rather, was that he would use this occasion to offer a special blessing to his favorite son. The fatherly blessing was considered by them to be much more than just kind words that the father spoke to their children. The blessing laid out the desires of the parent for the child, and thus became a prophecy of sorts about what this child's life would be like. Well, Rebecca overheard this conversation between Isaac and Esau, and she wasn't about to let her favorite son miss out on whatever Isaac held in his store of blessing. Jacob already had Esau's birthright, he may as well have his blessing too. So Rebekah hatched a plot for Jacob once more to grasp at Esau's heel, to drag himself to the foremost position in the family. And while Esau was out scouring the woods for some game, doing the bidding of his father, Jacob and Rebekah were back home scheming. Jacob killed 2 young goats, and Rebekah cooked them up just the way she knew her husband liked them. She sent Jacob to his father with the meal. Esau could not see, or Isaac could not see, but he could still feel and he could still smell. So Jacob put on some of Esau's clothing so he would smell like Esau. He covered his smooth hands and his neck with goat skins to make him hairy like his brother. Now all I have to say about that is Esau must have been one hairy dude. If it took goat skins to resemble his skin. As they feared, when Isaac heard Jacob's voice, he suspected there was some trickery going on. And so he says, "Come closer." And when Jacob came closer, he smelled him, he touched him, and he believed him to be Esau. He ate the bread and meat, he drank the wine, and then he offered Esau's blessing to Jacob. And this is what he said: "May God give you of heaven's dew and of earth's richness, an abundance of grain and new wine. May nations serve you, and people bow down to you. Be Lord over your brothers, and may the sons of your mother bow down to you. May those who curse you be cursed, and those who bless you be blessed." When Esau, a little later, came in from the field and learned what had happened, he was heartbroken. There was nothing he could do about it. The patriarchal blessing could not be repeated, nor could it be taken from one brother and given to another. Once spoken, it was considered to have been done. And so Esau was left with the consolation prize. And he bitterly complained about his brother. "Isn't he rightly named Jacob? He has deceived me these 2 times. He took my birthright, and now he's taken my blessing." Jacob, by trickery, had received not only the blessing of Isaac, but apparently also the blessing of God. Hardly seems right and fair, does it? Wouldn't God be able to see through that? If Jacob is being put forth as a hero here, his behavior hardly seems what we would call heroic. It appears that he was blessed by God for sinful behavior. But is that really what happened? From a very limited human perspective, that's what it looks like. We have to ask, who is this story about? Is it about Jacob and Esau and the justice or injustice in their situation? At first glance, that seems correct. However, as with most of these stories we're going to look at from the Old Testament, the heroes are never presented as sterling examples of character. Rather, as Paul says in 1 Corinthians, they are presented to us as warnings and examples. Usually examples of how not to behave. In this case, the story really is not about Jacob being blessed because of his sin, but about the gracious action of God through him in spite of his sin. God used even a grasper, a cheat, a deceiver, and accomplished his purposes through him. It's also a story about what God accomplished within him. As a result of Jacob's deceit, Esau wanted to kill him. So Jacob fled for his life. On his journey to safety with his mother's relatives back in the homeland, he stopped for the night. And as he slept, he had a dream in which he saw a stairway reaching from earth to heaven, and the angels of God ascending and descending on the ladder. And God stood at its top and made the same covenant with Jacob he had made with his grandfather Abraham and his father Isaac. When he awoke, Jacob was troubled by what he had seen, and he immediately recognized he was in a holy place, as he put it, the house of God, Bethel, the gate of heaven. And so he renamed the place. He called it Bethel, the house of God. And he promised if God would be faithful and eventually return him to his father's house, he would serve the Lord and give him a tithe of all God gave to him. God's transforming work in Jacob was beginning. He continued on his way to the house of his uncle Laban, whereupon he met and at first sight fell in love with his cousin Rachel. And here's where the story gets interesting. According to their custom, Jacob worked 7 years for the privilege of marrying Rachel, only to receive a big surprise the morning after the wedding. Scripture simply says, when morning came, there was Leah. Now, the surprise was not necessarily a prize in Jacob's eyes. He had finally met his match in Laban, and the deceiver was himself deceived. He had to commit to 7 more years of labor for the privilege of marrying Rachel. After many years with Laban, Jacob and his entourage decided to return to his homeland. He came as a single individual. He left with a large family and herds and flocks. By this time he had 11 sons and a daughter. He had 2 wives and 2 mistresses, many flocks and herds. He was indeed a wealthy man by their standards. And as he went on his way home, he thought about what was ahead. He thought about reconciling with his brother Esau. That alone, I think, is a sign of the transformation God was working in him. He leaves with one attitude. He returns a changed man. He prayed for God's protection, and he trusted in God's promises. He didn't know what Esau's response was going to be. And so, as he gets closer to meeting with Esau, he sends gifts on ahead of him, generous gifts for his brother. And the night before they were to meet, he sent his wives and children on ahead of him across the Jabbok River, and Jacob was left alone once more on the far side of the river. And Scripture says that night he engaged in a wrestling match that went on all night long. And after they had wrestled all night, neither party gained the upper hand until his opponent touched his hip socket and wrenched his hip joint. But Jacob still did not give up and demanded a blessing from the man. Then the man said, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel." because you have struggled with God and with men and have overcome. Jacob's transformation had reached the point where God could use him. And he deserved a new name, reflective of the struggles he had been through. The man who was wrestling never would tell Jacob his name. But Jacob knew. He recognized his opponent and was awed by the realization. And he named the place Peniel, face of God, saying, it is because I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared. Can God use you? Maybe you doubted that. Maybe you think the mistakes of your past make you unredeemable. Maybe you think you have no value to God. Think about Jacob. Did you ever think God could use a conniving thief like Jacob? A greedy man who got what he wanted by stepping on others? The answer is probably not. And the answer for us is that too. Not if we stay the way we are. But the testimony of Jacob is that God can, by his transformative power, change us into someone he can use. It may take some serious struggles, some disappointments along the way, even some wrestling matches with God. Even at our strongest, we are no match for God. But Jacob's life demonstrates to us that God often sees in us what we do not see in ourselves. When we finally submit to him, then is when he can bless us. And when we encounter God face to face, we cannot help but be transformed. Last week we learned that the phrase son of or child of is really in Scripture an idiom that often means to bear the characteristics of the father or the mother, whoever it is it's referring to. With that in mind, I want to ask you a question today. Are you children of Jacob, or are you children of Israel? There's a big difference. Are you wrestling with God today? Are you struggling against him, refusing to give your life to him? It's only when you submit and commit to doing his will that you will receive his blessing. You can continue to wrestle with God. You can struggle against what he wants you to do or what he wants to do in your life. But it will be the hardest struggle of your life. And you will not win. Will you commit your life to Jesus today? And will you receive the blessing that only he